The air's heavy with lavender, sweet, almost choking. Candles burn low, their flames shivering against stone walls. Silk drapes fall in folds too heavy for such a small body, and her hands tremble in her lap, though no one dares to notice. She's 12, maybe 13. Feet barely touch the floor. Ankles swing above cold marble. The crown pressed onto her head is heavier than her neck can bear. But tonight, they call her queen. Her ribs ache beneath a gown laced too tight. Her breath comes shallow, as if the fabric itself is stealing it from her. Eyes trace the shadows of the chamber, searching for something safe. There is nothing safe here. Outside, the sound of celebration drifts in. Viols, flutes, and shallow drums. Inside, silence presses down. She knows what is coming, and she knows she cannot stop it. This child was never allowed to be a child. From the moment of her birth, they told her she was sacred, chosen, destined. But sacred things are not held gently. They're broken open, used, and she would be no exception. Her story is not a fairy tale, not the legend carved into marble, not the tapestry of divine love they later displayed in palaces. Her story is darker. It is the story of a young queen whose body was claimed before it had grown. A young queen whose womb became the throne room of a dynasty. A young queen whose child would save the crown and take her life. Before we begin, a warning. This story contains themes of child marriage, abuse, and childbirth at an age no body should endure. Listen with care. And if you believe stories like hers should not be silenced, if you believe history's buried victims deserve a voice, subscribe now, because here we remember what history tried to erase. She was born beneath a red moon. The midwives whispered first that it was a sign, a gift, a warning. The blood-red sky meant power, destiny, favor from the heavens. The court seized those whispers and turned them into prophecy. Before she could take her first breath, she was already a symbol. Her cry was strong, too strong for a newborn, they said. The cord had wound around her neck, once, tightly, yet she lived. Chosen, they called her. But chosen did not mean cherished. It meant claimed. Her mother bled for 3 days after the birth. No one spoke of that. What they did speak of were her tiny fists, curled as if ready to fight. Her eyes, opened too soon, locking with the bishop's gaze. They said she was born knowing, born ready, born for the crown. The dynasty had grown thin. Years of intermarriage, years of fragile heirs, years of coffins carried too soon. The bloodline was breaking. But her birth changed everything. She was proof it could be restored. Her body, even in infancy, was their salvation. From then on, her childhood was no childhood at all. She was 3 when they taught her to walk with folded hands, 4 when they took away her toy horse, because queens did not ride, 5 when her tutor handed her a scroll, not with stories, but treaties. Her father sat her on his lap and told her she would marry a king. Her uncle corrected him. She will make one. Every doll she owned wore a crown. Every portrait of her showed no smile. Every mirror she looked into told her the same thing. You're not a girl, you're a relic. They measured her body as if it were an heirloom. Meals weighed, breaths counted, posture corrected until her bones ached. When she asked why, they told her children would carry the throne in their teeth. She did not understand, but she stopped asking. This was not nurture. It was preparation. Every step of her life was rehearsed for the role they had already written. The role of womb, the role of vessel, the role of sacrifice. And the court was obsessed. Obsessed with bloodlines, with purity, with keeping the crown in the family, no matter the cost. They believed that the kingdom itself lived inside her veins. that her body was the lock and her child someday would be the key. But dynasties built on purity are fragile. They bend rules until they break people. They rewrite love into duty. They turn children into brides. From the moment she was born, her fate was sealed. She was never meant to be free, never meant to choose, never meant to live as herself. She was not a child. She was an answer to a prophecy. She was a vessel for a dynasty desperate to survive. And that desperation would one day cost her everything. From the moment she could stand, they corrected her posture. Back straight, chin level, hands folded. She was taught not to walk, but to glide. Not to breathe freely, but to breathe quietly. Even her silence was rehearsed. Every detail of her body was studied. Every tilt of the head, every bend of the wrist. The lessons were endless and merciless. A queen, they told her, must never stumble. Not in step, not in word, not in thought. Her small freedoms vanished one by one. Running was forbidden. Running heated the blood. The blood must remain cool, preserved. Her meals were weighed before every bite, measured not for her hunger, but for her shape. A growing queen, they said, must grow in perfection. She kept a small journal under her pillow once, childish sketches, questions, dreams. One day, a maid found it and laughed. The bishop was told. The journal disappeared. So did the maid. After that, she never wrote again. She was not being raised. She was being carved into something cold and obedient. A vessel, not a girl. The lesson was enforced not only by her training, but by fear. Her cousin, just 2 years older, had smiled at a stable boy. Just a smile. She was sent to a convent the next morning. No one spoke of her again. The message was clear. Desire was dangerous. Affection was forbidden. And she never smiled again. Then came the decision. Whispers at first, then decrees. The bloodline had grown too fragile, too thin. The only way to preserve it was to marry within. Her groom would not be a stranger, not a foreign prince, not even a distant cousin. It would be her brother. They dressed it in holy words. They called it divine unity. They called it sacred blood. But what it was desperation. A dynasty so obsessed with purity that it chose incest over survival with dignity. This was not unheard of. Egyptian pharaohs had married sisters to brothers, declaring themselves gods. Spanish courts, centuries later, would tangle their bloodlines until their kings were born weak, sick, broken. History is littered with dynasties who worshipped purity and sacrificed their children to maintain it, and she was one of those children. The wedding day arrived, the city celebrated, bells rang, drums thundered, flutes filled the streets. Outside it was music, joy, the illusion of unity. Inside, silence, thick and suffocating. Her gown was ivory silk stitched with lions and suns, symbols of power she did not feel. Cloaked women tightened the laces until she could barely breathe. Her ribs screamed against the fabric, her eyes blurred. But she did not resist. They led her to the throne, feet barely touching the ground. Her brother entered, crown heavy, smile rehearsed, still a boy himself. But today, they called him Majesty. He took her hand, warm and familiar, and for a moment she remembered games in the garden, whispered stories by firelight, but she forced the memory away. She was not his sister now, she was his bride. The vow was placed on her tongue like a spoonful of sugar, recited, repeated, swallowed. When his lips met hers, the crowd erupted in cheer. But behind the cheer, her fingers were ice, her legs were numb, her heart was breaking. This was no wedding, this was a bargain. A child's body promised to a crown, a dynasty secured at the cost of her freedom. And though history painted the moment as divine, the truth was simpler. She was a girl, and she was trapped. The first night began with a knock, not a husband's knock, not even a brother's, but a stranger's. She sat at the edge of the bed, knees drawn close, nightdress chosen by others. Her braid had been loosened just enough to fall across her shoulder. Candles flickered against velvet curtains. The room smelled of lavender and fear. He entered slowly, carefully. He smiled. She did not. He called her my lioness, but she felt like prey. He moved as if gentleness could erase the truth, as if quiet steps and whispered words could make what was about to happen less violent. He kissed her cheek. He took her hand, and she learned her next lesson. Do not resist. Do not tremble. Do not cry loud enough for anyone to hear. The bed did not creak, but she did, and when it was done, she lay still, staring at the canopy above her. The silk sheets smelled of lavender and sweat. He left. The silence remained. The next morning the palace rejoiced. They called it love. They toasted to unity. A poet sang verses of moonlit passion between crowned siblings. Ladies-in-waiting giggled, fanning themselves as if it were romance. Her aunt, now her mother-in-law, declared she had the glow of a wife. No one asked why her hand shook. No one asked why her eyes stayed glassy and far away. This became her rhythm. Mornings draped in gold, nights pressed into silence. Her every gesture rehearsed, her every smile ordered. Sit when told, speak when told, undress when he came. She was no longer a girl, no longer even a sister. She was a role, a body, a vessel. The court praised her devotion. Priests blessed her womb. Servants whispered that she carried herself like divinity. But the truth was quieter. She was disappearing. Not in one moment, but in fragments. A word lost here, a memory erased there. Piece by piece she was being emptied. Pain was painted over with beauty. Portraits showed her radiant, serene, draped in white silk and heavy jewels. One canvas bore the title, The Queen, as vessel. A crown on her head, hands resting gently against her stomach. But the truth was not captured in oil and pigment. The truth was in the trembling fingers hidden behind her sleeves, the numbness in her legs when she left the altar, the silence that followed her everywhere. In public she was celebrated, in private she was erased, and in that silence, the kingdom grew louder. They called it sacred, they called it love, but what it was suffering. The first sign was a stain of red on lace. She hid it, wiped it away with trembling fingers, but within days the palace knew. Whispers turned to cheers. The bishop declared it a miracle. The physicians bowed lower than ever. The kingdom rang its bells. The bloodline was secure. She was 12, and her body was already beginning to break. The sickness came quietly at first, a cough of bile in the mornings, hidden in her sleeve. Then the nausea spread, in the corridors, in the chapel, even at the feast table. She vomited once beneath a painted ceiling of angels. The priest looked away. No one helped her. Soon she was never alone. A midwife was stationed at her chamber door. Physicians whispered in riddles. Not pregnant, never that word. Too vulgar. Instead they said, the queen is blessed. The queen is chosen. Her swelling stomach became the centre of every conversation, as if she were not even there. She was no longer a sister, a bride, a girl. She was a vessel, a walking womb draped in silk. Ministers spoke of her in metaphors. Poets wrote of her glow. And every night she lay awake, pressing her hands against her ribs, reminding herself where her skin ended and his began. The corridors became her prison. every step watched, every breath measured. She counted footsteps of guards outside her door to pass the hours. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 4, 5, 6. Pause. Her body was stilled, her soul restless. At night she whispered to the carved angels on her ceiling. Not prayers, questions. Will I survive this? Will I ever be free? The angel stayed silent. She began to hide bread beneath her pillow, a crust of loaf stolen from her tray tucked under the linen. Just in case, she thought. In case the baby came hungry. In case she didn't make it through. Then came the moment. The flutter. A twitch inside her belly like the wing of a trapped bird. It should have been joy. It should have been wonder. But for her, it was terror. Because the life inside her was real. Because the life inside her belonged to her brother. The kingdom celebrated. The portrait painters prepared canvases titled The Queen as Vessel. Her body became prophecy. Her pain became poetry. Every smile forced onto her lips became evidence of divine destiny. But behind the painted gold, behind the hymns and blessings, the truth was darker. She was fading, piece by piece. A word here, a memory there. Her voice shrank to whispers, her body to function. In public, she was radiant. In private, she was vanishing. The kingdom believed it was gaining an heir. But what it was truly doing was consuming a child. It began with pain, not the sharp kind, the slow kind, the kind that coils behind the spine, creeping into the thighs like something alive. She tried to stand, her knees buckled. The midwife caught her before she hit the floor. "It's too early," someone whispered. "Too soon." But the child did not wait. The chamber was sealed, curtains drawn tight, windows locked, air thick with incense and burning herbs. The smell made her gag. 6 women circled her bed, their hands pretending to comfort, but really just moving her into place. Not one of them spoke her name, only titles, only commands, only prayers. The pain thickened, rolling through her in waves. Her hands clawed at the sheets, her nightdress soaked with sweat, then blood. They murmured that everything was fine, that queens had done this for centuries, that this was divine. She screamed, not words, not names, just fear. A raw sound torn from the child still hidden inside her. She called for her mother, but her mother was long gone, and no one came. Outside the chamber, her brother waited, not pacing, not weeping, discussing names, coronation plans, the heir's cradle. His voice calm, measured, as her body broke apart behind closed doors. The baby would not turn, hands pressed against her stomach, her legs forced wider, her lips cracked dry, her eyes rolled back. A midwife squeezed her hand and called her brave, but she was not brave, she was dying. Then, before dawn, the cry came. Not hers, the child's, slick, small, alive. They wrapped him in cloth of gold, carried him away before she could even see his face. The kingdom had its heir. The dynasty was saved. The physician bent close to her. Her lips moved once, just once. No one heard the word, and then silence. Not soft, not peaceful, just still. They covered her body with velvet. They whispered complication. They said she was fragile. They said it was God's will, but never the truth. Never that she was 12. Never that she was a child. The bells did not toll. There was no mourning. Instead, the baby was paraded through the palace in a silver cradle. The court drank wine. The poets wrote verses of sacrifice. The painter began a canvas. The queen in eternal sleep. They used the word holy. They used the word divine. They used the word sacrifice. But never child, never sister, never victim. Her erasure began the moment her silence fell, and the dynasty moved forward. The cradle was ready before she ever went into labour. Oak gilded in gold, padded with red silk. Now it was no longer hers, it belonged to him, the baby prince. He was paraded through the palace, swaddled in linen embroidered with scripture. Courtiers kissed his forehead. Priests declared him twice blessed, once for his birth, once for what it cost. The bells rang, not for her, but for him. The dynasty had its heir. The dynasty had survived, and she was gone. The poets wasted no time. They wrote verses of divine sacrifice, of a queen who gave her life so the kingdom might live. The painters followed, capturing her as serene, eternal, glowing with holy light. One portrait showed her holding a child she never touched. Another depicted her asleep in marble peace, lips curved faintly toward heaven. The pain, the blood, the screams erased with every brushstroke. Statues were commissioned. One showed her seated, calm, with the infant in her arms, but she never held him. That part was cut from the story, cut and replaced with grace. She was renamed in death. No longer the child queen, no longer the sister bride. She became Mother Sovereign, a title that buried the truth of what happened to her body, a title that disguised her suffering as devotion. But history leaves cracks. A midwife's note found centuries later, stained, hurried, listing hours of labour, weight of child, ending only with, "The mother lost too much." A bishop's letter tucked inside a robe. She screamed, and none of us moved. A missing page in the wedding registry, a name scratched from a family Bible, fragments, faded, fragile, but undeniable. Through these fragments, her real story flickers back to life. Not a saint, not a symbol, a girl consumed by a crown too heavy for her head, because history does not simply forget. It chooses what to polish into legend and what to bury in silence. And her pain, her voice, her truth was buried until now. They called her a miracle. They called her chosen. They called her sacrifice. But the truth is simpler. She was a child trapped in silk, crowned with duty, silenced by a dynasty that valued bloodlines more than breath. History polished her into legend, painted her serene, carved her into stone. They turned her pain into poetry, her suffering into devotion. They called her Mother Sovereign. But behind the hymns and portraits, she was erased. This is not just her story. It is the story of countless girls who never lived long enough to write their own. Girls forced into beds they did not choose. Girls turned into wombs for kingdoms, for crowns, for men who never asked. Girls remembered only as statues, legends, saints, legends without voices. But you have heard her voice now, through fragments, through whispers, through the silence she left behind. And you, listening here now, you are her record. You are the proof that she was more than a crown, more than a womb, more than a footnote in a dynasty's glory. Her story matters because it is not finished. Child marriage still exists. Girls today are still called sacred, chosen, honoured, while their bodies are used and their voices silenced. Her pain is not only in the past, it echoes in the present. Remember her not as they painted her, but as she was. Small hands trembling, a voice fading, a life stolen. They called her holy. She was only a child.